This building you might not recognise. This is the Exeter Phoenix Arts and Media Centre down in the southwest, which is where I was. I was director here for a number of years in the 90s. And it's a big arts building with with a theatre and lots of participatory workshop spaces and all sorts of stuff going on. And I was living down in Devon and in the middle of the countryside, half an hour away from Exeter. And our nearest neighbours over the hill were a couple of medics, one of whom was a GP who saw a lot of people coming into his surgery who didn't necessarily need medication, but they had other sort of life-related concerns that he was found himself dealing with. We talked a lot over dinner and wine and cups of tea about how creativity in the arts could help address health and well-being concerns that medicine, beyond the scope of medicine, or to complement medicine. Our discussions led to the formation of a new charity which got funding from the National Lottery through the Healthy Living Centre Fund. We set up Upstream Healthy Living Centre. The GP's name was Pete Toomey. He was a very keen swimmer, fisherman. So he liked the idea of intervening upstream, up the river, and trying to prevent things from happening or cascading at an early stage. So this centre, actually without walls, it was a sort of outreach project right across mid-Devon, and it ran a whole range of activities, some of which you can see there. And it was properly tracked and researched by Peninsula Medical School, and they found after 6 months, people who took part in the programmes, 60% of them experienced clinically meaningful benefit, 30% experienced a high degree of positive change, a kind of transformative change in their lives, and clinical levels of depression fell from 45% to 35%. So very much a sort of an effect complementary to what medication might produce. The process for me of being engaged in a project that was all about creativity and health was very transformative for me as well, and it made me think much more broadly about what the arts are all about and what creativity is all about. But I got a call, and some of you might recognise this chap. 20 years ago this photo was taken. We're all looking a bit older now, but this is Roger De Haan, and I was recruited. He'd become chair of the board of the Metro Arts Centre. Another amazing building right next to where we are now. You can just see the Grand poking out there. And the Metro had, the whole ground floor was dedicated to galleries. Actually, we expanded into the whole of the ground floor. Originally, it was just one room. Galleries and a music room, what became a music room, although not without some glitches along the way. But we operated from, so Roger had found himself chair of the board of this organisation, and he wanted to revitalise it and brought me in as director. And the first thing we did was get it up and running as a sort of fully functioning gallery and art centre. But then we started to look beyond the perimeter of the gallery itself into the rest of the town. And by this point, both I and Roger De Haan were very interested in the way that arts and creativity can play a role in broader issues around regeneration, around social capital, as we were discussing just a minute ago, around economic development and health and well-being, obviously. So that was our kind of starting point. Now I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the history of Folkestone for anyone who doesn't know. This is quite a sort of quirky history, if you like, but it gives you a sense of the town's growth and development. Does anyone recognise the artist here? J.M.W. Turner, and that is one of his paintings of Folkestone, and that's St Eanswyth's on the cliff top there. And so Folkestone was from before the Romans came an important Iron Age trading post, and evidence keeps emerging about showing how significant it was even back in the day, although that would have been more of the East Cliff rather than the Stade and the Pent Valley inlet. The Romans tried to invade a little bit further up the coast and were thrown back by the Iron Age Britons. Then in 43 AD, they managed to establish a permanent base here. And we know that there's a villa up on the East Cliff side, which possibly is linked to the Roman fleet from Boulogne. Scroll forward to 630 AD, St Eanswyth founds the first Christian community in England for women, exclusively for women. And then things take a turn for the worse then. 1055, Earl Godwin burns the place. Then 1215, the French come back and burn it again. And again in 1339, they're over here again doing a bit of burning. 1804, the invasion that never happened. Napoleon's over in Boulogne with 250,000 men waiting to invade, but the weather's never good enough, so he doesn't make it across. So we retain our borders, take control of our borders. And then things start to pick up finally. And by this point, Folkestone, late 18th century, Folkestone's still quite a small fishing village, really, essentially, and smuggling, a place for smuggling and various nefarious activities. But then things change dramatically in 1843 when the railway comes, making London accessible. And also by this time, the idea of the holiday has emerged, and places like Margate are already thriving. So Folkestone gets on the bandwagon and becomes seen as a place of great well-being, really, of the air, the water, connections to nature, and goes through a huge period of expansion, which culminates really in the construction of these two massive hotel buildings at the time on the Leas, and the establishment of the Leas as a hyper trendy place, and royalty and so forth would and Camilla's grandmother would be hanging out here. Is that Alice Keppel? Yeah, great grandmother. I don't know. Yeah. But then again, things dip down, and Folkestone becomes a military centre in the First World War, as you probably all well know, and a main embarkation port for the Western Front. And then again, in the Second World War, a story that's not really very well told, but 15,000 of Folkestone's buildings are destroyed or damaged. The whole town's evacuated and becomes a sort of just a military zone. So recovering from that I'm going on much too long. I'm going to have to speed up. Recovering after the Second World War is difficult. But I just wanted to show you, an image of Folkestone from the sort of turn of the century, when you can see the huge crowds. And to reinforce that idea of fashion and taste, this is, anyone know what this is? This is Spade House just down the end of the Leas and down towards Sandgate, built by Voysey, the architect, to the design of H.G. Wells. And Wells made his home in Sandgate and wrote some of his most successful works while he was here. And it was a very, very sort of modern place. Ensuite bathrooms, allegedly a first, and wheelchair accessible, because he came here because he thought he was, going to be an invalid for the rest of his life. So, in fact, he recovered, because obviously a tribute to Folkestone's healing powers, but he based himself here for many years. And here's Tontine Street around 1900, very fashionable, very cool place. The Bond Street, the south coast, someone once said. And right. Oh, and then, you know, obviously a little bit later, the Leescliffe Hall, and then the whole of the seafront laid out with modernist buildings by an architect, Pladel Bouverie, in the modernist style. So it was cool. And then as fashions do, things drifted away for Folkestone after the 50s and 60s. And by the time I got here in 2000, the period we're talking about, around 2000, very low educational attainment, high unemployment, poor health and housing, and a real sense that the town had lost its sense of direction. In fact, here's health deprivation stats. I won't show you any more graphs, I promise, but this is just one showing that there's a gap between sort of Saltwood to the west. As you go east down the graph to Folkestone Central, 9-year life expectancy drops by 8.9 years. So people are dying 9 years younger because of poverty in central Folkestone. I don't suppose anyone remembers this, but in 2001, a chap called Philip Carter organised a meeting at the Leescliffe Hall where about 800 people turned up and addressed the question, you know, is Folkestone dying? Can we save Folkestone? And this was timely for our project because we'd started to think exactly around this time, you know, what can we do to help Folkestone? And so there was a hunger for change, I think, in the town, which definitely is a very helpful factor if you want to bring a regeneration project forward. So we happened to have some money tucked aside, and we commissioned a big feasibility study, and we asked the consultants to look at various elements. We wanted them essentially to help us to think about reconnecting the town in different ways, reconnecting the east of the town to the west of the town, and reconnecting the inland parts of the town to the sea. So there's a kind of physical geography element to it. But we also wanted, more importantly, in a way, to reimagine the town as a place of, you know, a vibrant place, a place where lots of things happened and where people could feel positive about the future. So there are a number of elements to what we wanted to put forward, and I'll just run through. They all morphed and changed as time went by, but there was an artist quarter, a performing arts centre, a sculpture park, a kind of focus around creative education, and a focus on arts and health. 5 strands to the project, and we cracked on with it. Within 10 years, the Observer was saying, we're witnessing the rebirth of coastal Britain. The most ambitious project is underway in Folkestone. And even the Daily Telegraph, bless them, were saying art and education are the keys to the Renaissance for our coastal towns. So getting the story was kind of seeping into the national consciousness, I suppose. This is, you can probably just see Tontine Street going up directly in a straight line north from the harbour, which is slightly out of the picture to the south, and then the old High Street winding up in that sort of off to the left there, and then Rendezvous Street completing the rather kind of quaintly heart-shaped creative quarter. And in yellow there on the map are all the projects that the Creative Foundation, which is the new charity that we set up and we used as the vehicle for our regeneration program. These were all the projects that we acquired over a period of about 5 or 6 years, including Payers Park in the middle. And by the end of my time as director of the Creative Foundation, which is about 2010, the Roger De Haan Charitable Trust had made a £45 million investment. There was some other investment from public funds as well. And we'd acquired about 90 freehold properties. That's a lot of square meterage, over 100 studios and offices, 80 flats, 50 shops and restaurants, and about 500 people working in the area. That's an example, typical property, the Wedge down there. Some of you might remember the old Builders Merchants, which became the Performing Arts Centre under Alison Brooks, architect's design. That's the Roman Villa, and there was a heritage archaeology project at Canterbury Christchurch. university led on. In terms of education, the Academy School, what was called the Channel School, was the 4th worst school in the country by exam results, and that was replaced with this prominent Norman Foster building, which has really had a dramatic impact on educational attainment in the town over the years. The old glassworks was converted into, first of all, a university centre, which Grenville played a significant part in bringing forward. And then when that project came to an end, a sixth form centre and now service co-working space for businesses. The sculpture park idea never quite gelled, so what we ended up with was the triennial, which was a series of commissions by some of the leading public contemporary visual artists around the town. So this is a Tracy M in bronze, which you might know about. There are 7 of these around the town in different locations, a little teddy bear, a glove somewhere. They're sort of called baby things. And that's Yoko Ono, who was commissioned for maybe the 2014 triennial, I think. And she's saying, I thought I was coming to a sleepy little town, but I found this amazing energy, so much activity, a kind of spiritual rising. And she's there in rock salt. And that's the Mark Dion Mobile Girl Appreciation Unit. The Financial Times saying this is a triennial that will transform our experience of a seaside town and should attract global interest, which indeed it did. But not to underplay the importance of participation. You know, this wasn't about parachuting in world famous artists to make art about the town. It was always about the creativity of the local people, and participation was at the heart of everything we did. This is Strange Cargo and their lantern procession. This is a packed audience of school kids attending a literary festival event. And by the way, the book festival used to take place in this building for a few years. And that's somebody you might recognize. And we'll talk about, I'll let him talk about what this is. And just say, you know, this is not all a picture of sunshine and roses. There's problems and challenges. Here's a headline in Kent Life: the oversized plans for Folkestone seafront will turn our town into Shoreditch-on-Sea. And I think if you look at the way that the public health statistics and the demographics have changed, there is evidence that what we hoped for, which was a kind of process of regeneration where the tide rises and all the boats are lifted, didn't so much happen as we'd hoped. And it was more a case of what we've seen is gentrification, where new people have come in and displaced, in some cases, people already in challenging circumstances. So how you deal with that problem, I really, I don't know, because with the best will in the world. And I was actually specialist advisor to the House of Lords Select Committee on the regeneration of coastal towns. I don't think there are any easy answers to that problem. However holistic you are in your approach to regeneration, there's always going to be the point at which you create something attractive and people with money are going to move in, and that's going to have effects on local people. So challenging, but some great results as well. This is Little Amal down at the Folkestone Harbour, Folkestone's Harbour Station, which was derelict, in 2000, and that's now been, as you probably know, refurbished and turned into part of this amazing attraction down on the harbour. And that's a quote from the Arts Council saying, the transformation of Folkestone has been an inspiration to the Arts Council and to towns and cities across the world. Folkestone's cultural profile has been raised beyond anything I could have imagined. That's the Seaside Towns Committee. I won't talk about that anymore. And this I dug up yesterday. This is an old email from 2001, I think. And it starts with this bit here at the bottom where it's me saying to Grenville, the trustees met last night and agreed to elect you to join the board. Congratulations and welcome. And Grenville replies, I'm honoured and look forward to receiving a schedule of events. Also in position to confirm the sequence of platform concerts, and we'll send details next week for perusal. 1 or 2 ideas for evening concerts. Big band is on, so much going on, you know. Many exciting things on many fronts. Arts and health. Good responses to our process of consultation, and we're undertaking prior to the research proposal. We've organised a regional conference together with the Health Development Agency and finding huge levels of interest. Folkestone would be an ideal location for a regional springboard. There you go. I think that's my cue to Grenville.
Lovely to see you, and thanks very much, Nick. So once this is about arts and health today, I think I'm going to change the focus now, because it's essentially about singing and health. And there's no hierarchy of engagement within the arts, but one element is absolutely true, and this is confirmed by the wonderful Robin Did that say? Dunbar. Just meant Robin Dunbar, who said in one of his many books that to be human is to be able to laugh, to be able to sing, and to be able to dance. Those 3 elements actually separate us out from all other species. So a porpoise is a magnificent creature with sound-making elements that are communicative and very beautiful when we record them, and they're very graceful, and yet there is actually something missing even within that beautiful creature that prevents them from being human. That is, those 3 elements. Cognitive development is such that if I want to dance, I can actually listen and respond to a stimulus in that way. If I want to sing, I've got a cognitive pathway that allows my muscles to be determined by my thought process to be able to make a sound that is actually pitched in a different way to that which I'm using right now. So we are able to laugh because of our evolutionary process in that part of a defense mechanism, and also a greeting mechanism. So I'm either very angry right now, or I'm terribly relaxed and wanting to say hello in that way. So laughter, dancing, and singing. So my focus is particularly on this notion of actually being hardwired to sing. And why is that important? It's important because that thing that I am using right now, the speech and communication and stringing words together in a language that you understand because we are all largely native English speakers, is actually a very young and recent activity that we've been part of and able to take part in. So the development of language is possibly only, say, 300,000 years old, whereas our development as human beings is actually millions and millions of years in its development. So we were using sound in a different way before we had language to communicate to each other. So in a wonderful book that Yoon and I co-authored called Singing and published in a really a very significant moment in our history in this country in March 2021, when in fact singing was outlawed because of the pandemic. So it wasn't a timely launch for a book to do with singing. In that book, we refer to the notion of actually modulation of sound our ability as humans to be able to modulate sound in such a way that we are able to communicate with each other. Now, if we think about that then in evolutionary terms, we have actually come through a process that saw us being, first of all, quadrupeds. And gradually, as we stood up and became bipeds, then we had to develop a means of communication using modulation of sound a long time before we had language. And that modulation of sound then we possibly now call singing in that way. But up until, I don't know when, until we developed the language and words to be able to describe that, we weren't able to give it a title. Now, when we were bipeds then, two things happening. That we were seeking shelter, and we sought shelter largely in places like caves. This morning there's a reference on Today, if you listen to it as you're eating your breakfast or not, to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one thing, and the second thing was actually the discovery of an artifact which is completely DNA uncontaminated by anybody, and after that person died. And so they've got an idea of that, the social grouping, just from this necklace and a bead that's on that necklace. So that both those elements actually are linked by the fact that they were cave dwellers. And these cave dwellers allowed bipeds to seek shelter, but also to actually represent the world around them. So we know what they did. They actually saw the world around them and devised techniques. Imagine this, to be able to say, I am alive, so I'm going to develop a system whereby I can represent my hand on this wall by finding materials, so I can spray across that hand and leave my mark. I am here. I understand my position in this greater scheme of things. I'm there. That level of sophistication then of the biped, without recourse to language, but recourse to the means of actually saying, I am here and I want to actually capture a moment in time. It's inconceivable to think that those cognitive processes were not concerned with actually modulation of sound in such a way that, one, there was an element of direct communication. I'm happy, or I'm sad, oh, I'm in pain, ah, in that way. Or actually, by dint of the fact that these bipeds actually had a reduced pelvic girdle from the time they were quadrupeds, it's potentially the fact that the new human is being born preterm. And so the new human is being able to be brought into the world but put down, rather than the lambs that we see right now coming out of the mother ewe, sheep, and then suddenly going, whoa, here I go, I'm here, I'm fully formed, and I can get on with my life. As humans, we're not fully formed, and we can't get in our lives. We need somebody to look after us for quite some time. And we need somebody to actually communicate with us, to know that actually we're in distress, or we're comfortable, or we need feeding. And so we're going to make sounds in such a way, that was lovely. Or, ah, please, help me, in that way. Whatever the extremes of communication are, then this modulation of sound is there to be able to allow that to happen without reference to language. So we're hardwired then to sing, hardwired to modulate sounds in that way. Our evolutionary development is such that that's a background of where we are. jump 300, 200, 400, 3 million years later, wherever, from that point to where we are now, then we're all still able to modulate sound, but we've actually see sound modulation as largely somebody else's responsibility. Yeah? Because we've come through a historical process that has actually seen sound and sound manipulation, instrumental work, vocal work, as actually being part of an evolutionary performance process. So performed music now becomes actually somebody else's responsibility. So last week at the Marlowe, we saw one of 2 examples of the most extraordinary virtuosic singing by English touring opera, where we have examples of an opera by Handel and an opera by Rossini with the most extraordinary vocal capacity and vocal range and vocal techniques needed to realize that performance process. So far away from the cave dweller in one sense, and in another sense, so far away from the majority of us who are not actually singing virtuosically in the shower this morning or in the bathroom or whatever, but actually everybody having the capacity to modulate sound. So where we are then with singing was that my background was very simple. And one of the elements of my simple background was I used to go to a Methodist chapel on a Sunday, actually 3 times sometimes. Oh, dreadful, totally dreadful. I couldn't, it was too much. But one of the things that I was drawn to was actually the fact that we were part of a singing community, regardless of who we were. We sang on a Sunday and we sang wonderful hymns, lovely hymns. And then once a year we had a singing festival, a choir festival, where people, normal people, just came together and realized Mendelssohn's Elijah or Handel's Messiah, whatever. These great oratorios that were coming through from the 19th and into the 20th century as it was then. So the background was there in terms of me realizing a social element and also a sort of, a link with a sort of historical, cultural element, one there. Secondly, went to university. At university, I really wanted a BBC producer or a journalist, and the BBC didn't want me, and neither did the Times newspaper. So what did I do? I actually said, well, I'll do teacher training, because I'd rather like to stay at university for another year. I did teacher training, and it was the most wonderful experience. Not the teacher training course, it was deplorable, it was horrible. But in fact, actually going into schools, 2 schools on teaching practice and actually being part of a process using music as a means of engaging with young people. So I was really spurred on to actually be part of that process of learning and teaching in that way. So teaching became important. One of the elements of teaching that I wanted was total inclusion, total activity. And what's the best thing to do? To do that was to embrace children by them singing at the same time as each other, regardless necessarily of the quality. Actually, the engagement was the thing first and foremost, and quality actually started to develop as we came there. Become eventually a teacher trainer to teach other young people to be engaged with children in that way, and young children, and at the same time then develop music in a university department, which was for a little while on its knees. So we developed music at this heart of the university. So bringing these 3 things together, actually social inclusion, feeling better about oneself because we're actually doing things. And the third thing, which I've forgotten completely, was, but it was terribly important, was actually to change the world. Okay, so to change the world, we had to change the world. So I met a colleague when I was at Christchurch, Stephen Clift, and he used to come to my community choir, and we were singing in the community, with students. So inclusion, students and community coming together. And Stephen was part of that. And we decided to undertake a bit of research with this group of singers, just to see what they felt about singing. And let me just refer to this to make sure that I've actually going to tell you exactly what we said, because we identify 6 dimensions, and this paper was called The Perceived Benefits of Singing. And we identify these 6 dimensions from these 94 people's responses. And they were benefits for well-being and relaxation, benefits for breathing and posture, social benefits, spiritual benefits, emotional benefits, and benefits for the heart and immune system. Now, those were the 6 elements that we drew out of the questionnaire responses of these 94 people. So they seem to be quite significant, really, and related to all my own experiences in a sort of social and educational setting. I could relate to those, and certainly with the students, that was the case. So do you know that little paper, which was published in 2001, has now been cited 536 times. Whee! If only we'd got 10 quid every time. That would be good. But there we are. So if you see a passing academic today, ask them how many citations have they got. And if we've got 17, you know, you're doing pretty well, really. So 536 is quite good. So we replicated that study in January, or published in January 2010, having done a study with singers in Australia, in Germany, and in Britain. So we replicated the whole thing. And this time there's something like, how many? Over 650 participants. So almost 8 times the number of people taking part. So a large study. And that large study, believe it or not, in fact, gave exactly the same results from the questionnaires across 3 different cultures, although I think, you know, Les Patterson said that the I won't repeat what Les Patterson said about the Australians and culture, but it had to do with exerting a lot of wind, I think, in that way. Expressing a lot of wind. So German-speaking culture, Australian-speaking culture, and British-speaking culture, all coming together and replicating some of the research that we've done before, but in a different setting now, which Ewan will come on to a bit later on today. So those research findings seem to then amplify everything that I felt myself and wanted to actually put into train. So because of that awful man, the Vice Chancellor, I left the university. I resigned. I wasn't sacked, by the way. If he's put it out that he was sacked me, I didn't. I resigned, and also I decided that we wanted to maintain the engagement with the community in such a way, with singing at the heart. So we established a charity eventually with Roshna as the chair, who's here today, to having the strapline of caring through singing being at the heart of this. I'd had the great fortune to meet Nick, as he said already, and to meet Roger De Haan. And as a trustee of the Creative Foundation, I proposed to Roger, not as a trustee, but as a member of the Canterbury Christchurch University, but through being a trustee, I proposed to Roger that we develop a business plan about establishing a research centre in Folkestone called, as it was through Trish's suggestion, the Sidney De Haan Research Centre for Arts and Health. Sidney De Haan Research Centre for Arts and Health. In memory of Roger's father, who'd found music and singing to some degree a help in the latter stages of his life, where that was important to him. And Roger supported that research centre with a huge amount of money, relatively, allowing us to establish a pattern of activity over initially 4 years, all designed to explore the impact of singing on health. Absolutely, singing was the major focus all the time. Allow us to do that, and then through a contact through Matt, being able to go to another foundation, following on from Roger's support, to the Oak Foundation, to ensure that the Sidney De Haan Research Centre actually has been constantly working since 2003. So 20 years ago, there's been an uninterrupted engagement with research into arts and health, initially primarily focused on the impact of singing. The goal was, and still is, seems to me, I don't know about the research centre because I'm no longer engaged with that, but the goal is certainly for our trust, and that trust which Trish has set up of Music for Wellbeing is actually to attempt to achieve a position where we have singing on prescription, where singing becomes a means, a tool for the general practitioner, for that interventory in primary care to actually say, you know what, go down, try that group down the road. There's some madman called Hancox who's actually got a group at Holy Trinity. Go down there and see what's happening on a Monday and see if you feel better. Here's the bus fare, basically, because we don't charge for people. Oh, we do we? I don't know. Anyway. You have a cup of tea. So we were able to have singing on prescription. So the part that this trust plays and Trish's trust plays is actually, I think, referring back to those elements that we had in our initial research with Stephen and I, the benefits for well-being, benefits for breathing, social benefits, spiritual benefits, emotional benefits, and benefits for the heart and immune system are at the heart of, if you like, the foundation of what we're doing on a weekly basis throughout the time. So I'd like us all now to be engaged in a process which actually brings all those things together. And I've got my dear friends here. Well, you're all my dear friends now. From Monday Music. And Monday Music is one of the elements of caring through singing. The other elements Matt referred to at the beginning, Sing to Beat Parkinson's, which took over from an established group that I, together with Roger Clayton, we established in 2009 to have singing as a means of actually helping people with Parkinson's. None of these things are a cure, we realize, but actually all those 6 perceived benefits actually can be experienced, it seemed to me, with Sing to Beat Parkinson. Sing to Beat. Sing for Your Life, yeah. Sing for Your Life was an offshoot of Sidney De Haan Research Centre, an original idea that I brought and then Stuart Brown developed, which was a wonderful idea of people going out from choral societies into a care home, into a place where people are actually just wanting to sing maybe, but not having a stimulus. And Sing for Your Life did that, and then developed a technological approach to singing, where you could actually use a machine instead of a person to actually replicate the experience in that way. So other aspects of that, our charities are concerned with that. Caring through singing, that's the thing. So we're going to care for each other right now. And we're going to go from this one beautiful room into that next beautiful room. And we're just going to sit down together. So do come.